The sun had barely risen over the red horizon when the dust began to lift from the hooves of the approaching rider. The desert was still waking, dry wind moving across the dunes, whispering through sagebrush and the bones of old cattle that had perished in forgotten droughts. The land stretched endless and cruel, an ocean of rust and silence. His name was Caleb Dunn, a ranch hand turned bounty scout, his face weathered by years beneath the punishing sun. He rode for long miles that morning, searching for lost cattle near the rocky ridges of the Sanduro Canyon, where even the coyotes feared to roam. Caleb had learned to read silence. He could tell when the desert hid something alive, and that morning it did. At first it was just a flicker of movement by the river bend. Something or someone had disturbed the stillness. Caleb dismounted, his boots crunching over brittle grass and cracked stones. He followed the tracks, small, light, and hurried. Not the gait of an animal, human, barefoot. He moved carefully, hand resting near the old colt on his hip. The prince led him down toward the shallow river, its silver surface catching the sunlight like broken glass. Then he saw her, a woman, no older than 20, crouched near the water's edge. Her hair was tangled, long as raven feathers and streaked with dust. Her dress, once white, was torn and stained with blood and sand. Her skin bore the copper tone of the desert tribes, Apache. She looked half-starved, her eyes wide and wild, darting between the cliffs and the man who now stood behind her. Caleb froze. He knew what it meant to find an Apache woman alone this far north. Trouble. The army had been pushing the tribes deeper into the wastelands for months now. Any fugitive caught this side of the border was either desperate or dangerous. The woman stumbled backward, slipping on the rocks. In the sunlight, her wrists gleamed, not with jewelry but raw wounds from broken rope. She had escaped someone, soldiers most likely. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. The story was already written in her face. She had been hunted, beaten. She was running for her life. She tried to rise, but her legs failed. The wind carried a faint, hoarse whisper from her cracked lips, a plea not meant for words but for mercy. Caleb took a slow step forward, torn between duty and something older, compassion buried under layers of dust and discipline. He left his canteen on the sand and backed away. The woman crawled toward it like a dying animal. She drank greedily, water spilling down her neck, eyes wide with disbelief. When she looked up again, her expression had changed. No longer fear, but gratitude. Then exhaustion took her, and she collapsed beside the riverbank, her body trembling. Caleb watched the horizon. He knew soldiers rode these canyons, men who'd shoot her on sight for nothing more than her bloodline. If he left her there, the coyotes wouldn't even wait for the moon. But if he helped her, he'd be branded a traitor. Harboring a fugitive Apache meant death. The old codes of the frontier had no mercy for such choices. Still, Caleb found himself kneeling beside her, lifting her frail body into his arms. Her pulse beat faintly against his chest, her breath shallow as he carried her toward his horse. The journey back to his cabin was long and silent. She stirred only once, when he crossed the canyon pass. In her delirium she mumbled something, voice soft as wind through reeds, words he didn't understand then, but that would come to haunt him later. I can wash your feet, I can be your mate, I can give you offspring. By nightfall, Caleb reached his cabin, a lonely shack built from pine and dusted with years of solitude. He laid her on the cot, covered her with his blanket, and sat by the doorway watching the stars rise. Somewhere out there, the soldiers were still searching. He could almost hear their shouts echoing in the distance. Inside, the woman's breathing steadied. The desert night grew colder, wrapping the cabin in silence. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel alone, but deep inside, he knew this fragile peace was borrowed, the kind that never lasted in the wild country. The next morning, before the sun broke the horizon, he'd have to decide, deliver her to the soldiers, or protect her, and face whatever came with it. And as the first light touched the canyon walls, a faint knock sounded. Not at the door, but at the door of fate itself. The morning sun crept over the canyon ridge, painting the wilderness gold and crimson. Inside the lonely cabin, the air still carried the scent of smoke and horse leather. Caleb Dunn had slept little. The night had been long, filled with the sounds of the woman's restless breathing and the distant howls of coyotes prowling near the ridge. When dawn finally broke, Caleb stepped outside, scanning the open valley below. The land looked calm, but calmness in the desert was a lie. The faintest spiral of dust in the distance betrayed movement. Riders, soldiers, maybe 3 or 4, their silhouettes moved like shadows against the rising light, slow and methodical. They were tracking something, or someone. He knew it had to be her. Inside, the Apache woman lay motionless beneath the rough blanket, her skin pale under the grime and bruises. The wounds on her wrists had turned a dark, angry red. She was too weak to move, too silent to plead, but her presence filled the cabin with something unfamiliar, a strange tension that pulled at the edges of Caleb's conscience. She was the hunted, and he was the only one between her and death. Caleb poured water into a tin bowl and began cleaning the mud and blood from her hands. Her palms were torn, the marks of someone who had run barefoot across stone and cactus thorns. Every touch reminded him how fragile she was. Yet beneath that fragility was a stubborn spark, the same wildness that survived where no law, no man, no mercy endured. He knew the soldiers wouldn't stop. The Army's orders were clear: capture or kill any escaped Apache prisoners. It didn't matter if they were warriors or women. They were all considered threats. Caleb left the cabin for a moment and climbed the ridge behind it. From the top, he could see their camp. A few hundred yards away by the dry creek bed, he recognized their horses and their trail patterns. Experienced men, not green recruits. They'd find the prince near the river soon enough, and from there they'd track her scent straight to him. By noon, the wind began to rise, bringing dust and the smell of distant smoke. He returned to the cabin to find her awake, her eyes open, fixed on the ceiling. She didn't speak, she didn't move, but the faint trembling of her fingers told him she understood what danger was closing in. Caleb knew he couldn't stay. If they came here, neither of them would live to see another sunrise. He gathered what little food he had: jerky, flour, a few apples. Then he prepared the horse. The woman tried to sit, her strength failing halfway. He lifted her gently, wrapping her in a coat. Her weight felt almost nothing, as if the desert had already taken part of her soul. When he mounted up with her in his arms, the horse shifted uneasily. The trail ahead led through the narrow pass known as Widow's Spine, a winding canyon where sound echoed for miles. It was risky, but it was the only path that led toward the high mesas where soldiers rarely rode. All day they traveled in silence, the woman half-conscious against his chest. The sun was merciless, turning the sand white and the sky hard as steel. Caleb's canteen emptied before sunset. His throat burned, but he didn't stop. Somewhere behind them, the faint echo of hooves followed, slow, steady, and inevitable. By nightfall, they reached a small plateau overlooking the valley. The stars came alive above, bright and cold. Caleb built a small fire, shielding it with rocks. The woman slept beside him, breathing shallowly. Every sound in the darkness felt heavier: the cracking of wood, the whisper of wind through brush, the heartbeat of pursuit that never ceased. He thought of the words she had murmured before. "I can wash your feet. I can be your mate. I can give you offspring." They had sounded desperate then, almost delirious, but now they lingered in his mind like a prophecy, something raw and haunting. What kind of suffering had carved such words into her soul? The fire's glow danced across her face, revealing scars, faint, but deep enough to tell stories of captivity and escape. Her tribe must have been destroyed or scattered. She had probably seen everyone she knew taken or killed. The thought stirred something inside him, not pity, but a strange reverence. She was the last ember of a people the world was trying to erase. As the night deepened, a noise reached him from the east, distant, faint, but real. Hooves. The soldiers had found their trail. Caleb extinguished the fire at once, covering the embers with sand. He tightened the saddle, lifted the woman once more, and guided the horse into the shadows of the canyon. They moved silently, every hoofbeat measured, every breath drawn carefully. Behind them, the glow of torches appeared in the distance. 4 riders, spreading out along the valley floor. Their voices carried through the wind, sharp and commanding. The hunt was closing in. Caleb led the horse deeper into the maze of rocks until the night swallowed them completely. The woman stirred, her lips parting as if to speak, but only a faint sigh escaped her. She didn't need to say anything. He already understood. Their fates were now bound, sealed by the silence of the desert. When the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, they had left the valley far behind. Ahead stretched a vast land of crimson mesas and ghostly cliffs. Freedom was out there, somewhere beyond the reach of soldiers and lawmen. But to reach it, they would have to pass through the heart of the wilderness and through each other's broken souls. Far below, the soldiers' shouts faded into the wind, replaced by the endless hum of the desert. Caleb knew they were not safe yet. The chase was only beginning. The sun had not yet touched the peaks when Caleb and the fugitive woman reached the mouth of the canyon. The land there was carved by time itself, steep walls of red stone rising like the ribs of a giant beast, shadowed and silent, except for the whisper of wind that moved through its hollow throat. Locals called it the Canyon of Spirits. For travelers who entered often never returned. Caleb had no choice. Behind him, the soldiers' pursuit still haunted the horizon, faint but relentless. Ahead lay the only refuge where no army dared to follow. The canyon was treacherous, full of blind turns, sudden drops, and the remnants of old burial grounds. To some it was cursed, but to Caleb it was a place the world had forgotten, and that was enough. The woman stirred weakly in his arms as he guided the horse through the narrow pass. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused, but she was breathing more evenly now. The fever that had taken hold of her seemed to have eased slightly, perhaps out of pure will to survive. The shadows of the canyon fell across her skin like markings from another world, ancient and sacred. Inside the canyon, the temperature dropped sharply. The air smelled of minerals and damp earth. Water trickled somewhere in the distance. Rare music in that barren country. Caleb dismounted, leading the horse by the reins as they moved deeper into the maze of rock. Hours passed without a sound, except for the echo of hooves and the low murmur of wind. Caleb's instincts told him to stay alert. The Apache tribes had once used these canyons for ceremonies and burials. Even in ruin, such places carried the weight of unseen eyes. He could feel it, the pulse of the land itself, watching. When they reached a bend where the cliffs widened, Caleb found a shallow cave. It offered shelter and a small pool of rainwater gathered from the last storm. He laid the woman down gently, covering her with his coat, then set about gathering dry brush from the canyon floor. Soon, the faint crackle of fire filled the hollow, its glow flickering across the stone walls, revealing faint carvings, symbols and figures etched long ago by her ancestors. For a moment, Caleb felt like an intruder in a sacred place. The drawings told stories of warriors, spirits, and lovers joined beneath the stars. He couldn't read them, but their rhythm spoke without words. He turned back to the woman, realizing she was awake now, her gaze fixed on those same markings. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only a deep, haunting sadness and recognition. Caleb tore a strip of cloth and soaked it in water, cleaning the dust from her forehead. Her hair, once tangled and matted, fell loose and dark over the coat. Underneath the dirt, her face carried a quiet strength, a nobility that seemed out of place in this harsh world. She had lived through torment, but her spirit remained unbroken. Outside, the wind shifted. Caleb stepped to the cave entrance, scanning the distance. For a moment, the desert was still. Then, faintly, he saw them. Tiny sparks of light along the horizon, campfires. The soldiers had stopped to rest, but they were close enough to find his trail again by morning. He had until dawn. Caleb spent the night in silence, his thoughts heavy. He had never been a man of mercy. The frontier hardened every soul it touched. Yet something about this woman, the way she clung to life, the unspoken fire in her eyes, stirred something long buried inside him. He didn't know her name, nor her story, yet he felt her pain as if it were carved into his own flesh. Near midnight he noticed movement at the edge of the firelight. A coyote stood watching them, silent, curious. Then another appeared behind it, and another. They circled slowly, their eyes glinting in the dark. Caleb reached for his rifle, but the first coyote turned and slipped away into the shadows, followed by the rest. It was as if the canyon itself had dismissed them. When the first light of dawn broke through the canyon walls, Caleb prepared to move again. He poured what little water remained into his flask and helped the woman onto the horse. She was stronger now, though still weak. Her gaze followed the rising sun, not with fear this time, but with purpose. The warmth of it touched her face, and for the first time since he'd found her, she seemed alive. As they left the cave, the wind picked up again, swirling sand and whispers through the air. The carvings on the wall caught the morning light one last time, glowing faintly. Figures of a man and woman standing together beneath a blazing sun. Caleb didn't know why, but he took it as a sign. The trail ahead wound upward toward the high plateau, where grassland stretched and the soldiers' horses could not easily climb. The woman leaned lightly against him as they rode, her head resting near his shoulder. The canyon narrowed once more, its red stone walls pressing close until only a sliver of sky remained above them. Then came the sound that froze him, a distant echo of hooves. The soldiers had found the lower entrance. Caleb urged the horse forward, but the path ahead split into two, one route leading upward into the sunlight, the other down into the shadowed depths of the canyon, where mist and silence waited. He had to choose fast. Behind them, the echoes grew louder. Voices carried through the canyon, harsh, commanding, relentless. The hunt had returned. Caleb turned the reins sharply, leading the horse into the shadows below, disappearing into the throat of the canyon, of spirits, deeper into the unknown, deeper into fate. The canyon swallowed them whole. Beneath its towering red walls, the world felt narrower, the air heavier, and every echo of hoof against stone multiplied into a haunting chorus that followed them wherever they turned. The path Caleb had chosen twisted downward deeper into the earth, until sunlight vanished behind jagged ridges and shadows ruled the passage. For a while, neither sound nor movement came from behind. The soldiers had lost sight of them. But Caleb knew this peace was only a pause, the kind that comes before a storm. The Apache woman clung weakly to the saddle, her body swaying with each step of the horse. Her strength was fading again, and her breathing had turned shallow. Caleb pressed on, guiding the horse carefully through the rocky terrain, his instincts guiding him where no map could. The canyon grew narrower still, until the walls on either side felt close enough to touch. Then suddenly the space opened into a vast hollow, a hidden basin veiled by mist and moonlight. A stream wound its way through the valley floor, its water shimmering red beneath the rising moon. Caleb had heard of such nights, when the moon bled across the sky, and the land turned strange, alive with whispers from the past. He led the horse to the stream and dismounted. The woman's head rested limply against his chest as he carried her down to the water's edge. She was burning with fever again, her skin slick with sweat despite the night's chill. Caleb soaked his kerchief and pressed it against her brow, watching the tremor in her hands ease slightly. The canyon seemed to hum with unseen life. Wind moved through the hollows, carrying faint sounds, not the howls of beasts, but the soft rhythm of drums that rose and fell with the breath of the earth. Caleb looked around sharply, half expecting to see figures among the rocks, but there was nothing, only the mist, the river, and the endless hum of the desert. He began to gather dry brush, building a small fire near the stream. Flames flickered upward, throwing light against the crimson walls. As they burned, the shadows seemed to dance, taking shapes that felt almost human. It was as though the canyon itself remembered, and was showing him echoes of those long gone. The Apache woman stirred beside the fire. Her eyes fluttered open, reflecting the glow of the flames. In that moment, she looked otherworldly, neither captive nor fugitive, but something older, tied to this land in a way Caleb could not understand. He could see in her gaze the weight of generations, of people who had loved, fought, and died beneath these same stars. She reached toward the ground, fingers brushing the dust as if in recognition. The markings in the soil were faint but deliberate, old symbols, carved long before Caleb's time. He realized they were standing upon sacred ground, a burial site perhaps, or a sanctuary hidden from the world. He sat beside her through the night, watching the fire rise and fall. His thoughts wandered, to the soldiers somewhere behind them, to the life he had left behind on the plains, and to the strange destiny that had bound him to this woman. He didn't know why he had chosen to help her. Perhaps because she was helpless. Or perhaps because saving her felt like saving something of himself that the frontier had tried to kill long ago. By midnight, the sound of drums had grown louder. The wind changed direction, cold and sharp, carrying the faint smell of smoke, but not from his fire. Caleb stood instantly, scanning the ridge above. There, faint glimmers of light moving along the canyon's rim. Torches. The soldiers had found the upper trail. He extinguished the fire, covering the embers with sand. The woman tried to rise, her body trembling, but her eyes met his with silent trust. Caleb lifted her once again and mounted the horse, turning toward the darker end of the valley. The path there narrowed into a hidden passage between jagged boulders, barely wide enough for one rider. Behind him, the soldiers' voices echoed faintly, their torches bleeding orange into the night. Caleb urged the horse forward, weaving through the labyrinth of rock and thorn. The moon above turned deeper red, bathing the canyon in a ghostly hue. The sound of pursuit grew closer. Boots striking stone, metal clinking, the steady rhythm of horses closing in. Caleb's heart pounded. The canyon walls began to close again, pressing tighter until he could barely see the sky. Then, as if the land itself shifted, the trail suddenly opened into a narrow bridge of rock suspended over a chasm. He stopped. Below, the drop was endless, black and bottomless. The only way across was the ridge ahead, barely wider than a wagon wheel. Behind him, shouts rang out. They were too close now. Caleb drew a deep breath, feeling the horse tremble beneath him. He gripped the reins, steadying the animal, then urged it forward. Step by step they crossed, the horse's hooves clattering against the rock, the sound echoing through the hollow. Each second stretched longer than the last. Halfway across, a bullet struck the canyon wall near his head, scattering shards of stone. Another followed, ringing off the rock like thunder. The horse reared slightly, but Caleb held firm, pressing onward. The woman clung to him, her face buried against his chest. Finally, they reached the other side. He turned the horse sharply, dismounting behind the first large boulder he could find. Shots echoed across the chasm, but none reached them now. The soldiers had stopped at the bridge, unwilling to risk the crossing in the moonlight. The canyon fell silent once more, save for the wind and the beating of his heart. Caleb looked down at the woman. Her eyes were open, wide and glassy, but she was breathing. The red moon glowed above them, casting its light over her face, over the endless rock and dust, a light that made everything look eternal and doomed all at once. He knew the soldiers would not turn back. They would wait, regroup, and hunt again. The blood moon would set, and with it, their small miracle of survival. But for now, they had lived through another night. As the wind softened, Caleb looked toward the horizon where a faint glow marked the coming dawn. Ahead, the trail led upward, toward the mesas, toward freedom, and perhaps toward an ending neither of them yet understood. Behind them, the canyon still whispered, its echoes carrying the voices of those who came before, spirits watching, waiting, knowing this story was not yet finished. The red moon sank behind the canyon ridge, giving way to the faint gray of dawn. The world was quiet again, too quiet, as if even the desert was holding its breath. Caleb Dunn sat against a cold boulder, rifle in his lap, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The Apache woman lay beside the dying embers of a fire he dared to light before sunrise. She was pale, her breaths shallow but steady. The long night had taken its toll on both of them. Caleb's muscles ached, his hands blistered from the reins, and his horse trembled with exhaustion. Yet the silence that followed their escape felt heavy, almost unnatural, a silence that came not from peace, but from something waiting to break it. The soldiers were still out there. He could feel it, the way a man feels a storm long before the thunder rolls. They had seen him cross the ridge under the blood moon. They knew his direction, and men like that did not stop until their prey was cold or captured. Caleb rose slowly, walking to the cliff's edge. Below, the canyon stretched endlessly, a maze of red stone and shadow, the same land that had once belonged to her people. It was strange, he thought, how the world could steal everything from someone and still expect them to vanish quietly. But she had not vanished. She had endured. And now, through some cruel twist of fate, her survival had become his burden, or perhaps his salvation. When he returned to her side, she stirred slightly. Her eyes opened, cloudy with fever, and drifted toward the sunlight filtering through the rocks. She reached weakly toward the light, as if remembering something from another life. A ritual, perhaps, or a prayer whispered to forgotten gods. Caleb didn't understand, but he respected it. He broke what little bread he had left and moistened it with water from his canteen. She ate slowly, each movement a struggle, yet her strength seemed to return little by little. The desert, it seemed, was not ready to claim her just yet. By mid-morning, Caleb had packed their few supplies and saddled the horse. The trail ahead climbed steeply toward the mesas, high country where the land opened wide and the air turned thin. Few dared to travel there, water was scarce, and the winds could strip a man's soul bare. But it was their only chance. The army would search the lowlands first. They rode in silence, each hour stretching longer than the last. The heat returned with vengeance as the sun climbed higher. Dust clung to their skin, and the sound of hooves on hard stone echoed through the emptiness. Every now and then, Caleb glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see riders cresting the ridge, but there was only dust and light, endless and cruel. As the day bled into afternoon, the woman's head rested against his back, her breath faint but even. He realized she trusted him now, not because he had earned it, but because she had no one else left to trust. That knowledge weighed on him more than the rifle across his shoulder. When the sun began to sink, they reached a stretch of flatland overlooking the valley below. Caleb stopped the horse and dismounted. From that height he could see everything: the river winding through the canyons, the silver line of the soldiers' trail far in the distance, and beyond it, the smudge of smoke that marked their camp. They were closer than he had hoped. He knew then that running was no longer enough. Sooner or later they would corner him. The army didn't forget. They would call him a traitor for harboring her, for giving mercy where none was allowed. He would hang for it. And yet, when he looked at her, frail, bruised, but still alive, he felt no regret. The woman sat quietly on the ground, her gaze turned toward the setting sun. The dying light caught her features, revealing a beauty that had nothing to do with softness. It was the beauty of endurance, of something that had refused to die no matter how much the world demanded it. Caleb turned away, trying to bury the thought, but it lingered like a thorn beneath the skin. The line between protector and prisoner, between savior and sinner, had long since blurred. He didn't understand what bound them together, only that it was something older than law or blood, something as wild and unstoppable as the land itself. As night fell, he built another small fire, careful to shield it from view. The sky above was a deep ocean of stars, so clear it hurt to look at. The woman slept, her breathing steady. Caleb cleaned his rifle by the dim glow, his hands moving out of habit, his mind elsewhere. He thought about the words she had murmured days ago. "I can wash your feet, I can be your mate, and give you offspring." At first he'd dismissed them as fevered rambling, but now, in the stillness of the desert, they sounded more like an oath, not of submission, but of survival. It was as if she had offered the only thing left that the world could not steal from her, the will to belong to life again. The wind shifted, and Caleb froze. A faint sound drifted through the night, the whinny of a horse far too close, then another. Shadows moved along the lower ridge. Torches flickered in the darkness like ghostly eyes. The soldiers had caught up sooner than expected. Caleb doused the fire at once. The woman awoke, sensing the danger even before she saw it. Her eyes met his, and though no words were spoken, the message passed between them clear as thunder. "Run!" He threw the saddlebag across the horse, lifted her onto the saddle, and mounted behind her. The first bullet screamed through the night, striking the rock beside them. Sparks scattered like fireflies. Caleb spurred the horse into motion, heading toward the upper trail that wound along the mesa's rim. The chase began again, through wind, dust, and darkness. The soldiers' torches lit the valley behind them, weaving like snakes through the black. Each hoofbeat echoed like a heartbeat, every second a battle against the inevitable. The desert roared beneath them, and the night swallowed their trail. The price of mercy had been named, and it was coming to collect. The dawn broke over the desert like the soft lifting of a veil, light spilling across the sleeping land, glinting off the peaks and mesas. The air was still cool, but there was a weight to it, the kind that came before change. Inside the small cabin nestled in the canyon's shadow, Daniel woke to the sound of quiet breathing beside him. The Apache woman, Ayanna, still resting, her face softened by dreams. It had been weeks since he found her in that half-burned camp, and each passing day had woven their fates tighter together, thread by thread, like two lives refusing to remain apart. She was no longer the frightened fugitive he had once sheltered. The fire in her eyes had returned, tempered now by something gentler, trust. Yet in the calm of morning, Daniel could feel the unease that lingered between them. The world outside did not forget. To the townsfolk, and to the soldiers who hunted her people, she was still an outlaw, and to some, he was a traitor for hiding her. As the sun climbed, Daniel saddled his horse and stepped out to fetch water. The air shimmered gold as it passed over the sand. His thoughts were heavy. He had heard rumors from a traveling trapper. The army was sweeping the area again, rounding up the last of the Apaches. They were determined to crush what remained of the old tribes, to erase them from the land. Ayanna's freedom was once more in danger, and he knew there was no safe place left in these lands. Inside, Ayanna stirred and stepped out to meet him, her hair catching the light like strands of black silk. She had learned to move with quiet purpose, blending into this new life. Yet Daniel could sense that she missed her people. The songs, the firelight, the open sky unbroken by fences. She was like a bird resting on a broken branch, finding momentary peace but knowing that flight would one day call her again. That day came sooner than either expected. By afternoon, the rumble of horses echoed from the valley below, a sound that carried both warning and memory. Daniel froze. His instincts sharpened from years of frontier life. He climbed the ridge and saw them, a detachment of cavalry moving slowly, their dust rising in a golden trail. They were searching, deliberate and methodical. The moment he turned back, Ayanna was already readying the essentials, her bow, a small satchel of food, and the knife Daniel had given her. There was no fear in her eyes now, only resolve. Daniel's heart twisted with the weight of what he knew must come. They couldn't outrun the army forever. The world that once allowed men and women to live freely on their own terms was fading, swallowed by iron rails and lawmen's boots. They fled north that evening, moving through canyons painted in blood-red light. The silence between them was full, heavy with all that words could not hold. Night fell fast, and the stars spread across the sky like spilled silver. When they reached the old hunting grounds by the river, Daniel stopped. This place was sacred, place of endings and beginnings. There, in the flickering light of their campfire, he watched her gaze toward the horizon where her people's land once stretched unbroken. She seemed to belong to it more than to any man or settlement. Yet when she turned toward him, Daniel saw something deeper in her eyes, a belonging that went beyond the land, beyond blood. It was the quiet understanding of two souls who had met in the ruins of a world and chosen each other despite it. The next morning came with gunfire in the distance. Smoke curled over the hills. The soldiers were closer than he thought. Daniel's hand gripped the rifle tighter, his every instinct screaming to protect her, but Ayanna stepped forward, her expression calm. She touched his hand, urging him to let go. She knew that fighting meant death, not freedom, so they moved again, deeper into the wilderness, following old Apache trails that only the wind remembered. Days passed in silence. Their supplies ran low, their strength thinner with each mile. But love, fierce, wordless, unyielding, kept them going. In time they reached a hidden valley, untouched by the greed of men, where the earth was soft and the water ran clear. It was there that they made their home. Daniel built a shelter from cedar and stone, while Ayanna planted roots in the soil, both literal and of the heart. Seasons turned. The war in the plains raged and ended far away, and new towns rose where old tribes once rode. Yet in that secret valley, time stood still. Daniel's hair grew streaked with gray, and Ayanna's laughter became the morning's first sound. And one day, when the cry of a newborn echoed through the canyon, Daniel understood what she had once meant in that desperate plea, that she would wash his feet, be his mate, and give him life renewed. Years later, travelers who crossed that region spoke of a strange homestead deep in the wilds, where a rugged man and a woman of Apache blood lived together in peace, their children playing under the open sky. Some said they were ghosts of the old frontier. Others said they were proof that love could survive the cruelty of history. But for those who found their way close enough to see, the truth was simpler. Two souls, bound by fate and faith, who had chosen to build a world of their own where none existed before. And as the wind swept across the valley one final time, carrying the scent of cedar and rain, it whispered the story that began with a cry of desperation and ended in quiet devotion. The tale of the Apache fugitive and the cowboy who loved her beyond all law, all boundaries, and all time.